I'm Constance Lim, 52, and for 3 years, I've endured my daughter-in-law's cruel whispers, useless, burden, has been. After my husband's death, I became the live-in babysitter she tolerated, invisible in my own son's home. But when Marcus brought his new boss to dinner, everything changed. The CEO took one look at me, dropped to his knees, and said the words that would shatter my family's world. Mother, welcome back. 20 years ago, I walked away from my empire to raise my children. Tonight, they'd finally learned the price of underestimating me. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever felt invisible or dismissed by those closest to you, you'll want to hear what happened next. Like this video for more stories of hidden strength and unexpected revelations. The morning after that dinner, I stared at the wedding photo on my nightstand, the one Linda had suggested I move to the closet because it clashed with the decor. In it, I wore a tailored Chanel suit, my arm linked with David's as we stood outside our Westchester home. The woman in that picture commanded boardrooms, not kitchens. Constance, Emma's lunch isn't going to make itself. Linda's voice cut through my reverie. She stood in my doorway, manicured nails tapping against the frame. And please remember to use the organic peanut butter. I don't want her eating that processed garbage you bought. I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. 3 years of this. 3 years of being treated like hired help in what was once my own guest room. After David's funeral, Marcus had insisted I move in to help with Emma. What he meant was to become their unpaid nanny, while Linda pursued her yoga instructor certification. Also, Linda continued, examining her reflection in my mirror. Marcus's dry cleaning needs to be picked up by 5. The BMW needs gas too. She paused, studying me with those calculating eyes. Try not to embarrass us if you run into anyone we know. The woman who once negotiated million-dollar deals with city officials now measured her words carefully. Of course, Linda. She left without another word, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. I turned back to the photo, remembering the weight of respect that once came with my name. David used to joke that I could convince anyone of anything: city planners, investors, even stubborn contractors. Now, I couldn't even convince my own family that I deserved basic dignity. Emma's small voice drifted from the hallway. Grandma Constancy, can you help me with my math homework? I smiled, the first genuine expression I'd worn all morning. Coming, sweetheart. At least one person in this house still saw me as someone worth talking to. As I walked toward Emma's room, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. When had I started hunching my shoulders? When had I learned to make myself smaller, invisible? Tonight's dinner would change everything. But in this moment, I was still just the burden they tolerated, the grandmother who'd outlived her usefulness. The business card hidden in my jewelry box felt like a relic from another life, one where Constance Lim meant something more than free childcare and household maintenance. Emma looked up from her worksheet, pencil poised over a word problem. Grandma, if someone builds 10 houses and sells them for a profit, how much money do they make? I sat beside her, studying the numbers. Well, that depends on many factors, Emma. The cost of materials, labor, permits, market conditions. You know a lot about building houses, she said, her dark eyes curious. I used to, I whispered, helping her work through the problem. Used to know a lot about many things. The building blueprints were yellowed with age, carefully preserved in a manila envelope at the bottom of my closet. I unfolded them on my bed, my fingers tracing the hand-drawn lines I'd sketched 30 years ago. The first Lim Holdings office, a modest 2-story building in Flushing, Queens, that would become the cornerstone of an empire. I was 22 when I arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase and my father's dying words, build something that lasts. Constance, make our name mean something. My English was broken, my savings account empty, but I had something more valuable than money. I had hunger. The first job was cleaning offices at night while studying construction management. During the day, I'd watch the contractors, asking questions until they either taught me or told me to shut up. Most chose the latter, but I persisted. I learned about permits, about materials, about the dozen small corruptions that turned simple projects into year-long nightmares. My breakthrough came when Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman in Chinatown, couldn't get contractors to finish her restaurant renovation. They'd taken her deposit and disappeared, leaving her with exposed wiring and unfinished walls. I offered to complete the work for the cost of materials, using it as my training ground. "You're just a girl," she'd said, skeptical. "What do you know about construction?" "I know how to learn," I'd replied. "And I know how to keep my word." 6 months later, her restaurant was booming, and she'd recommended me to 5 other business owners. By 25, I had a crew of 12 and a reputation for finishing projects on time and under budget. By 30, Lim Holdings was bidding on commercial developments across Queens and Brooklyn. The secret wasn't just hard work. It was understanding that construction was about relationships. The permit office, the union representatives, the material suppliers, they all needed to trust you. I learned their names, remembered their children's birthdays, showed up when others made excuses. The real breakthrough came with the Sunset Park development. The city wanted to revitalize a neglected area, and I saw an opportunity where others saw only problems. One spent months researching zoning laws, environmental regulations, and community concerns. When I presented my proposal to the city council, I didn't just offer buildings, I offered hope. "Mrs. Lim," the council chairman had said, "your proposal shows remarkable vision, but this is $100 million project. Are you certain your company can handle something of this scope?" I'd looked him in the eye, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Chairman Rodriguez, I've built my reputation on delivering what I promise. This project isn't just about construction, it's about creating a community. I understand that because I've built my own life from nothing." We won the contract. Within 5 years, Lim Holdings had completed 4 major developments, employed over 300 people, and established me as one of the most respected developers in the city. The modest office in Flushing became a downtown Manhattan headquarters with floor-to-ceiling windows and a reception area that impressed even the most skeptical investors. But success came with sacrifices. 18-hour days, missed holidays, relationships that withered under the pressure of endless meetings and site visits. I told myself it was temporary, that once the business was established, I'd have time for a personal life. Then I met David at a charity gala. He was different from the men I usually encountered, gentler, more interested in my thoughts than my portfolio. He made me laugh, made me remember that there was more to life than blueprints and profit margins. "You're extraordinary," he'd said on our 3rd date. "But when was the last time you took a vacation?" I'd laughed, but the question haunted me. When had I last read a book that wasn't about construction? When had I last had a conversation that didn't involve permits or contracts? David changed everything. He made me want more than just professional success. He made me want a life, a family, a legacy that couldn't be measured in square footage or quarterly profits. The blueprints in my hands represented more than just a building. They represented the woman I'd been, the empire I'd built with nothing but determination and refusal to accept limitations. That woman seemed like a stranger now, but her strength was still there, buried beneath years of diminished expectations and accepted disrespect. Tomorrow night, that strength would resurface, but tonight, I was still just the grandmother folding laundry and planning meals, the ambitious young woman who'd conquered the construction world, nothing more than a memory preserved and fading. Blueprints. The stock certificate was crisp despite its age, my signature bold and confident across the bottom. 49% of Lim Holdings, signed over to Richard Jung, my most trusted partner, and the man who'd helped me navigate the complex world of commercial real estate. I'd kept 51%, maintaining control while giving him the opportunity to build something meaningful alongside me. That changed when Marcus was born. David found me in the hospital room, staring at our newborn son with a mixture of wonder and terror. "He's perfect," he whispered, his finger tracing Marcus's tiny hand. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I can manage a construction site with 200 workers, but I have no idea how to be a mother." "You'll figure it out," David said, his voice full of confidence I didn't feel. "You always do." But motherhood wasn't like construction. There were no blueprints, no established protocols, no supervisors to consult when things went wrong. Marcus cried for reasons I couldn't decipher, slept at impossible hours, and needed constant attention that divided my focus between boardrooms and nurseries. For the first 6 months, I tried to do it all. I'd nurse Marcus at dawn, attend contractor meetings at 9, review proposals during his afternoon nap, and negotiate deals while he played at my feet. My assistant became a part-time babysitter, my office wall covered with family photos alongside architectural renderings. The breaking point came during a critical city council meeting. Marcus had been sick all week, running a fever that wouldn't break. David was traveling for work, and I couldn't find a reliable babysitter. So I brought him with me, certain that his exhaustion would keep him quiet through the presentation. Halfway through my pitch for the Queen's Community Center project, Marcus began crying, not the gentle fussing I could manage with gentle bouncing, but the full-throated wail of a truly miserable child. The council members shifted uncomfortably as I tried to continue speaking over the noise. "Perhaps we should reschedule," suggested Councilwoman Martinez, her tone sympathetic but firm. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. This was a $50 million project, months of preparation, and I was losing it because I couldn't balance motherhood with professionalism. "I'm sorry," I managed. "This isn't typically how I conduct business." "We understand," the chairman said. "Family comes first." But did it? That night, as I held Marcus while he finally slept, I realized I was failing at both roles. I wasn't the mother he deserved, distracted by phone calls and site visits. I wasn't the businesswoman my company needed, compromised by diaper changes and feeding schedules. David returned from his trip to find me crying at our kitchen table, surrounded by proposals I couldn't concentrate on. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "I can't do this," I said. "I can't be everything to everyone. Marcus needs a mother who's present, not someone who's always thinking about the next deal." "So what are you saying?" I looked at the stock certificate I'd been carrying in my briefcase, the document that represented my controlling interest in everything I'd built. "I'm saying maybe it's time to choose." The decision took weeks of agonizing consideration. Richard assured me that he'd honor my vision, that Lim Holdings would continue to reflect the values I'd instilled. The company would thrive under his leadership, and I'd retain a minority stake that would provide financial security for our family. "Are you sure about this?" David asked the night before I planned to sign the papers. "You've worked so hard to build this company." "I've worked hard to build a life," I corrected. "The company was just part of that. Now, I want to build something else, a family." The transition was surprisingly smooth. Richard had been involved in every major decision for years, and the company's reputation was strong enough to weather the change in leadership. I kept an office and consulted on major projects, but the daily operations were no longer my responsibility. For the first time in 10 years, I had time to breathe. I could attend Marcus's pediatrician appointments without rescheduling board meetings. I could cook dinner without conference calls interrupting the meal. I could be present for the small moments that I'd previously missed. First words, first steps, first attempts at independence. The financial sacrifice was significant. What had been a controlling interest worth tens of millions became a minority stake worth considerably less. But watching Marcus grow, being there for every milestone, seemed worth more than any profit margin. David supported my decision completely, never making me feel guilty about the reduced income or the smaller house we had to buy. "You're not giving up your dreams," he'd said. "You're choosing new ones." I believed him then. I believed that I was trading one form of success for another, that raising Marcus would be as fulfilling as building skyscrapers, and in many ways, it was. But I never imagined that my sacrifice would eventually be seen as weakness, that stepping back from business would somehow diminish my worth in my own family's eyes. The stock certificate in my hands represented more than just a financial decision. It represented the moment. I chose to trust that love and respect were more valuable than power and control. 20 years later, I was learning how wrong I'd been. Linda's Hermes handbag sat on the kitchen counter like a monument to her priorities. $12,000 of leather and status, more than most people earned in months. She'd mentioned the price casually during breakfast, the way other people discussed the weather. "I really deserve this," she'd said, stroking the soft leather. After everything I've sacrificed for this family, I'd bitten my tongue, focusing on Emma's scrambled eggs, instead of pointing out that Linda's greatest sacrifice seemed to be choosing between yoga classes and pottery workshops. But that was my life, now swallowing responses, keeping peace, pretending that her casual cruelty didn't cut deep. The morning routine was always the same. Marcus would kiss Linda goodbye, grab his coffee, and rush to work without acknowledging me beyond a grunt. Linda would then begin her daily inventory of my failures. "The laundry detergent you bought is wrong," she announced, pulling items from the shopping bag I'd carried up 3 flights of stairs. "Emma's sensitive skin needs the organic kind, not this chemical nonsense." "I bought what was on the list," I replied gently. "The list said detergent. I assumed you'd have enough sense to buy the right kind." She sighed dramatically. I suppose I'll have to be more specific, write everything down as if she stopped herself. But I knew what she was thinking, as if I were stupid. This was Linda's specialty, the unfinished insult, the implication that hung in the air like smoke. She never said I was useless directly, but she made sure I understood my place in her household hierarchy. I ranked somewhere between the houseplants and the cleaning supplies, necessary but unremarkable. Also, she continued, inspecting the organic vegetables I'd selected, next time don't buy the bruised produce. I know you grew up when people couldn't be picky about food, but we have standards now. The casual dismissal of my background was another favorite weapon. Linda had grown up in suburban Connecticut, the daughter of a dentist and a real estate agent. She'd never known hunger, never worked multiple jobs, never built anything from nothing, but somehow, this made her more refined than the woman who'd immigrated with empty pockets and built a multi-million-dollar company. I'll be more careful, I said, because arguing would only make things worse. Good though. And Marcus mentioned that you've been telling Emma stories about your workdays. Please don't fill her head with inappropriate content. She's very impressionable. My stories weren't inappropriate, they were about problem solving, about persistence, about treating people with respect regardless of their position. But Linda seemed to think that any mention of my past was somehow threatening to her vision of proper family dynamics. The worst part wasn't the constant criticism. It was watching Marcus allow it. He'd sit at the dinner table while Linda made her little comments, his expression carefully neutral. Sometimes I'd catch him looking uncomfortable, but he never spoke up, never said, "Linda, that's my mother you're talking to," never reminded her that this was the woman who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed her career to be present for every school play and soccer game. "You know what your problem is," Linda had said last week, after I'd accidentally broken one of her precious wine glasses. "You never learned to adapt. You're still stuck in the past, trying to act like you matter." I'd cleaned up the glass in silence, each shard a small reflection of how broken I'd become. The woman who'd once commanded respect from city officials now apologized for existing. But Linda's cruelest moments came when Emma wasn't around to witness them. She'd wait until we were alone, then deliver her assessments with surgical precision. "Marcus feels sorry for you," she'd said just yesterday, folding laundry with practiced efficiency. "He knows you can't take care of yourself, that you'd be lost without us. But honestly, Constance, sometimes I wonder if we're enabling your helplessness." Helplessness. The word had echoed in my mind all day. The woman who'd navigated complex zoning laws and managed hundreds of employees was now considered helpless because she couldn't remember which organic brand of pasta Linda preferred. The handbag on the counter seemed to mock me with its expensive indifference. Linda owned dozens of them, each one costing more than the monthly salary I'd once paid my office manager. But I wasn't supposed to mention having had employees, having had responsibilities, having had a life that mattered. "Emma's teacher wants to schedule a conference," Linda announced, returning from her morning yoga class. "I'll handle it, obviously. We can't have her thinking Emma's family is." She paused, studying my worn cardigan and comfortable shoes. "Well, you understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that my granddaughter was being taught to be ashamed of me, that my son had chosen his wife's approval over his mother's dignity, that the woman who'd once been featured in business magazines was now too embarrassing to attend a parent-teacher conference. But tonight, everything would change. Tonight, Linda would learn that the old woman she'd dismissed as useless had once been courted by mayors and respected by competitors. Tonight, she'd discover that the handbag she treasured so much wouldn't buy her the respect she'd spent 3 years stealing from me. As I prepared dinner, I allowed myself a small smile. Soon, Linda would understand exactly who she'd been underestimating. The business magazine lay open on Marcus's desk, its glossy pages reflecting the afternoon light streaming through his home office window. "CEO of the Year. Richard Zhong's Vision for Urban Development," read the headline, accompanied by a photo of a distinguished man in his 50s standing before a gleaming skyscraper. "This is huge, Linda," Marcus said, pacing excitedly around the room. "Richard Zhong is coming to our house. Do you understand what this means for my career?" Linda smoothed her designer dress, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Of course I understand. That's why I've planned the perfect evening. The caterer will arrive at 5. The wine is already chilled, and I've made sure everything is absolutely perfect," I continued, setting the table in the dining room, invisible as always during their important conversations. But I'd seen the magazine, had read about Richard's latest projects, his company's expansion into sustainable development. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I'd been reading about Richard Zhang for 20 years, watching from a distance as he'd built upon the foundation we'd created together. "Mom, make sure you stay in the kitchen tonight," Marcus called to me. "This is a business dinner, very important. Maybe order some takeout for yourself and Emma." "Actually," Linda interjected, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when planning my humiliation. "Constance should help serve. We want Mr. Zhang to see that we have excellent household management." I nodded quietly, understanding my role. I was to be the helpful grandmother, the domestic servant who demonstrated their family's traditional values. Never mind that the woman they wanted to parade as their employee had once negotiated deals with men just like Richard Zhang. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Marcus straightened his tie, Linda checked her lipstick one final time, and I retreated to the kitchen as instructed. Through the serving window, I watched Marcus open the door with his biggest smile. "Mr. Zhang, welcome to our home. I'm Marcus Lim, and this is my wife Linda." Richard Zhang stepped into our foyer, and my heart stopped. 20 years older, silver threading through his hair, but unmistakably the young architect who'd once brought me blueprints and stayed until midnight refining designs. The same intelligent eyes, the same careful way of observing everything before speaking. "Thank you for having me," Richard said, his voice exactly as I remembered. "You have a lovely home." "Thank you. We're so honored to have you here," Linda gushed, taking his coat. "Marcus has told me so much about your company. The work you're doing in sustainable development is absolutely fascinating." As they moved toward the living room, Richard's gaze swept the space, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the careful decorating choices, the obvious prosperity. His eyes lingered on a photo of David and me from our wedding day, but he said nothing. "Can I offer you a drink?" Marcus asked. "We have an excellent wine selection." "That would be nice," Richard replied, but I could see his attention was elsewhere, studying the details of our home with the same methodical approach he'd once used to review construction plans. I emerged from the kitchen carrying the appetizer tray, keeping my head down as I'd been trained to do. Linda had made it clear that I should be unobtrusive, professional, practically invisible. "These look wonderful," Richard said politely as I set the tray on the coffee table. I murmured a quiet thank you and turned to leave, but something made me glance up. Our eyes met for just a moment, long enough for me to see the flicker of recognition, the sharp intake of breath, the way his hand tightened around his wine glass. He started, then stopped, studying my face with growing amazement. Linda stepped forward smoothly. "This is Marcus's mother, Constance. She helps us manage the household. We're so lucky to have her." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard looked from Linda to Marcus to me, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something approaching shock. "Constance," he repeated slowly, as if testing the name. "Constance Lim." "Yes," Linda said impatiently. "She's been such a help since Marcus's father passed away. Now, shall we move to the dining room? Dinner should be ready soon." But Richard remained frozen, staring at me with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. "Is everything all right, Mr. Zhang?" Richard set down his wine glass with trembling hands. In one fluid motion, he stepped toward me, and to everyone's absolute shock dropped to one knee, his head bowed in respect. "Mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome back." The jade bracelet on my wrist seemed to catch fire in the sudden silence. It had been my grandmother's, then my mother's, and she'd given it to me before I left China with nothing but hope and determination. I'd worn it to every important business meeting, every contract signing, every moment when I needed to remember where I'd come from and what I was capable of achieving. Richard's eyes fixed on it now, and I saw the exact moment when memory crystallized into certainty. "The jade bracelet," he whispered, still kneeling. "You wore it to the Sunset Park presentation. You said it reminded you that some things are worth more than money." Marcus and Linda stood frozen, their faces reflecting confusion and growing alarm. This wasn't how important business dinners were supposed to unfold. CEOs didn't kneel before household help, didn't speak in reverent tones to grandmothers who served appetizers. "I don't understand," Linda stammered. "Mr. Zhang, she's just Marcus's mother. She helps with Emma and keeps house." Richard rose slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute respect. This woman built the largest minority-owned construction company on the East Coast. She pioneered sustainable urban development 20 years before it became fashionable. She's the reason I have a career, the reason my company exists. That's impossible, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. My mother was a housewife. She never worked outside the home. The look Richard gave my son was pitying and stern. Your mother was Constance Lim of Lim Holdings International. She was featured on the cover of Construction Weekly 6 times. The mayor of New York called her personally to consult on housing policy. She employed over 300 people and completed projects worth $500 million. I watched the color drain from Linda's face as she processed this information. The woman she'd spent 3 years dismissing as useless had been more successful than anyone she'd ever met. The grandmother she'd relegated to kitchen duty had once commanded boardrooms filled with the city's most powerful men. But she never said anything, Marcus whispered, looking at me as if seeing a stranger. Why didn't you tell us? Before I could answer, Richard spoke again, his voice gaining strength and conviction. Because your mother is extraordinary in ways you clearly don't understand. She stepped back from active management when you were born. She chose family over empire, love over legacy. Most people would have held on to power. She chose to trust others with what she'd built. I maintained a minority stake, I said quietly. Speaking for the first time since Richard's dramatic recognition, the company continued to thrive under Richard's leadership. Continued to thrive. Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mrs. Lim, we've expanded into 12 states. The sustainable housing initiative you pioneered is now federal policy. Your original investment has multiplied 20-fold. Designer handbags suddenly seemed pathetic, sitting on the counter. Expensive but meaningless compared to the legacy that surrounded her without her knowledge. This is impossible, she said, her voice high and strained. Constance doesn't know anything about business. She can barely manage grocery shopping. What I couldn't manage, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years, was your constant criticism. It's difficult to think clearly when someone is always telling you that you're useless. The words landed like physical blows. Marcus flinched, Linda stepped backward, and Richard's expression darkened as he began to understand the dynamic he'd walked into. Mrs. Lim, Richard said formally, I need to ask, have they been treating you poorly? The question hung in the air like an accusation. How could I explain 3 years of casual cruelty, of having my identity slowly erased, of becoming invisible in my own family? How could I describe the daily humiliation of being treated like a burden by people who had no idea what I'd sacrificed for them? They gave me a home when I needed one, I said diplomatically. That's not what I asked, Richard replied, his tone sharp. He turned to Marcus, and there was steel in his voice that I remembered from difficult negotiations. Do you understand who your mother is? Do you have any idea what she's accomplished? Marcus looked stricken, his carefully planned evening collapsing around him. I knew she'd worked in construction before I was born, but I assumed, it was something small, maybe an office job. An office job, Richard repeated incredulously. Your mother designed the affordable housing complex that won the National Urban Development Award. She's the woman who convinced the city to implement green building standards, 15 years ahead of federal requirements. Her work provided homes for thousands of families and jobs for thousands more. I touched the jade bracelet, feeling its smooth warmth against my skin. For 20 years, I'd kept my accomplishments hidden, letting my family believe that their respect was based on my role as wife and mother, rather than my professional achievements. I'd thought that love didn't require proof of worth, that being needed was enough. I'd been wrong. Linda's face cycled through emotions: disbelief, embarrassment, calculation, and finally, a desperate attempt at damage control. Well, of course, we're proud of Constance's past achievements, she said, her voice artificially bright. We just don't like to live in the past. We focus on family now. Richard's laugh was harsh. Focus on family, by treating her like hired help, by hiding her in the kitchen during important dinners. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus and Linda had no response, no excuse, no way to minimize what they'd done. They'd built their comfortable life on the foundation of my invisible labor, while treating me as if I'd contributed nothing to the world. The jade bracelet caught the light again, and I straightened my shoulders. The woman who'd worn this bracelet to transform skylines was still here, buried beneath years of diminished expectations but not destroyed. Tonight, She was coming back. The vintage rotary phone sat on my nightstand like a relic from another era. In many ways, it was. David had insisted we keep it when we moved to the smaller house, claiming its solid weight and honest mechanics were more reliable than modern technology. I'd kept it after his death for sentimental reasons, never imagining it would become my lifeline to a world I'd left behind. Richard pulled out his cell phone with hands that weren't quite steady. I need to call James Morrison, your former partner. He still runs day-to-day operations. Mrs. Lim, he talks about you constantly. The entire industry considers you a legend. That's not necessary, I began, but Richard was already dialing. Marcus and Linda stood frozen in our living room. Their elegant dinner party transformed into something they couldn't control or understand. The appetizers grew cold on the coffee table while their comfortable assumptions about reality crumbled around them. James, it's Richard Jung. I need you to sit down. Richard's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to delivering important news. I'm having dinner with Constance Lim. Even from across the room, I could hear James's voice explode through the phone. Surprise, joy, and something approaching reverence. Yes, James, that Constance Lim. I'm going to put you on speaker. The vintage rotary phone couldn't handle speaker mode, so Richard set his cell phone on the coffee table. James's voice, filling the room with warmth I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Constance, my God, is it really you? We've been trying to reach you for months. There's so much I need to tell you, so many developments you should know about. I touched the phone's heavy receiver, remembering countless conversations we'd had, planning projects, solving problems, building something meaningful together. Hello, James. It's good to hear your voice. Good to hear my voice. Constance, you disappeared 3 years ago. We sent cards, letters, tried calling your old number. We thought maybe you didn't want contact with the business world anymore, but we never stopped hoping you'd come back. Linda's face had gone pale. The woman she'd treated as an inconvenience had people searching for her, missing her, considering her disappearance a loss to an entire industry. I've been focused on family, I said simply. Of course. And we respect that completely. But Constance, you need to know what's happened. The sustainability protocols you pioneered, they're now federal law. The affordable housing model you designed, we've built 17 communities based on your original plans. The Lim Foundation, the what? I interrupted. James's voice grew excited. The Lim Foundation, we established it 5 years ago to honor your contributions to urban development. It provides scholarships for women in construction and engineering, funds community development projects, supports immigrant entrepreneurs starting construction businesses. Constance, we've helped over 2,000 people because of the legacy you created. I felt tears building in my eyes while I'd been washing dishes and folding laundry. Believing my life's work had been forgotten, others had been building upon what I'd started. My name was still opening doors, still making a difference, still changing lives. But that's not even the best part, James continued. The original investment you maintained in the company, Constance, with our expansion and the property values in your development areas, your stake is now worth you sitting down. James, I said quietly, just tell me, $47 million, and that's conservative. If we go public next year as planned, it could double. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus dropped heavily into his armchair, his face reflecting shock and something that might have been shame. Linda's expensive handbag looked ridiculous, sitting next to a phone conversation about tens of millions of dollars. There's more, James said, his voice growing serious. Constance, I'm not getting any younger. Neither is the rest of the original team. We need fresh vision, new leadership. We need you to come back. James, I'm 52 years old. I've been out of the business for 20 years, and the industry has needed your perspective for every one of those 20 years. The problems we're facing now: housing inequality, environmental sustainability, community development. These are exactly the challenges you were solving before anyone else understood they were problems. Richard leaned forward, his earlier composure replaced by passionate advocacy. Mrs. Lim, he's right. The construction industry is at a crossroads. We need leaders who understand that building isn't just about profit, it's about creating communities, improving lives, leaving the world better than we found it. That's always been your philosophy. I have responsibilities here, I said, glancing at Marcus and Linda. My granddaughter, your granddaughter, would be proud to see her grandmother changing the world, James interrupted. Constance, There are thousands of families living in homes you made possible. There are women with careers in construction because of the barriers you broke down. There are communities that exist because you saw potential where others saw only problems. I looked around the room at Marcus, who'd never known his mother was capable of commanding this kind of respect. At Linda, whose entire worldview was being dismantled by a phone conversation. At Richard, whose eyes held the same mixture of hope and determination I'd once seen in my own mirror. The vintage rotary phone suddenly seemed less like a relic and more like a bridge connecting who I'd been with who I might become again. James, I said slowly, send me the current project files. Let me see what you're working on. Constance, does this mean it means I'm interested in listening? That's all, for now. But even as I said the words, I felt something awakening inside me, a part of myself that had been buried under years of domestic routine and family obligation. The woman who'd built an empire was stirring, and she was tired of being invisible. Bank statement was 20 years old, yellowed at the edges, and filed away in a folder I hadn't opened since David's funeral. But the account it documented was very much alive, growing steadily through decades of compound interest, reinvestment, and careful management by financial advisors who'd never forgotten their most successful client. 47 million, Richard repeated, his voice still filled with amazement. Mrs. Lim, do you understand what this means? I understood perfectly. It meant that while Linda had been lecturing me about buying the wrong brand of laundry detergent, I'd been one of the wealthiest women in the state. While Marcus had worried about my becoming a financial burden, I'd had enough money to buy his house 10 times over. Show them, Richard said quietly. They need to understand the full scope of their mistake. I hesitated. For 3 years, I'd lived modestly in their home, accepting their charity, allowing them to believe I needed their support. Revealing my financial independence would change everything, not just their perception of me, but the fundamental dynamic of our relationship. Mrs. Lim, Richard continued, they've treated you as if you were dependent on their generosity. Don't you think they deserve to know the truth? Linda found her voice first. What truth? What is he talking about? I walked to my room and returned with the old bank statement, its formal letterhead and precise figures, a stark contrast to the comfortable domesticity of their living room. I set it on the coffee table next to Linda's expensive handbag. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes scanning the numbers. His face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a sick understanding of what he was seeing. This can't be right, Linda said, snatching the paper. It says that 20 years ago, I had enough money to live very comfortably without working another day in my life, I said calmly. That money has been growing ever since. But you live here, Marcus stammered. You depend on us. You don't have a car. You ask for spending money. For groceries, I lived here because you invited me after your father's death. I accepted your invitation because I thought you wanted me here, that you valued my presence in Emma's life. I never claimed to be dependent on you financially. Richard pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Within minutes, he had my current financial advisor on the line, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd been managing my investments with remarkable success. Mrs. Lim, Patricia Chen here. What an absolute pleasure to hear from you. We've been hoping you'd consider becoming more active in managing your portfolio. Patricia, can you give me a current valuation of my holdings? Of course, with the tech, stock gains, and the real estate appreciation in your development areas. You're currently sitting at approximately $58.7 million, and that's before we factor in the potential IPO for Lim Holdings next year. Linda made a small choking sound. Marcus sat in stunned silence. The woman they'd treated as a charity case had more money than they'd earned in several lifetimes. Mrs. Lim, Patricia continued, I should mention that we've been setting aside funds in an education trust for your granddaughter. As per your original instructions, she have full college funding available whenever she's ready. Emma, in all the shock and revelation, I'd forgotten that my granddaughter was upstairs, probably wondering why the adults were talking so loudly. She was the real reason I'd accepted their invitation to live here, not because I needed their support, but because I'd wanted to be part of her daily life. Thank you, Patricia. We'll speak soon. Richard ended the call and looked at Marcus with something approaching disgust. Your mother has been living as your dependent while having enough money to buy this entire neighborhood. She's been washing your dishes and doing your laundry while commanding more wealth than most Fortune 500 executives, and you've treated her like an inconvenience. I didn't know, Marcus said weakly. She never said anything about money, because she shouldn't have had to. Richard's voice rose with righteous anger. Your mother chose to live modestly and focus on family. That's called humility, not poverty. The fact that you assumed she was financially dependent says more about your character than hers. Linda was staring at the bank statement as if it might transform into something more comprehensible. $58 million, she whispered. You've had $58 million this entire time. I've had security, I corrected. I've had independence. What I didn't have was respect from my own family. The words hung in the air like an indictment. For 3 years, they'd built their sense of superiority on the foundation of my supposed dependence. Marcus had felt generous, allowing his poor mother to live with them. Linda had felt virtuous, tolerating the burden of an elderly relative. Now they understood that I hadn't needed their charity. I'd been offering them mine, my presence in their home, my help with Emma, my willingness to manage their household. These had been gifts, not obligations. All this time, Marcus said, his voice hollow, we thought we were taking care of you. You were, I said quietly, just not financially. I thought you were offering me something more valuable than money, a place in your family, a role in Emma's life, the comfort of being needed and wanted. But we made you feel unwanted, Marcus said, the reality of their behavior finally hitting him. Richard gathered the financial documents, his expression grim. Mrs. Lim, I think we need to discuss your return to active business leadership. The industry needs your expertise, and frankly, you deserve better than this. Linda's face had cycled through shock, embarrassment, and was now settling into something that looked suspiciously like calculation. I could see her mental gears turning, reassessing our relationship through the lens of my wealth rather than my worth. But money wouldn't buy back the respect I'd lost, wouldn't erase 3 years of systematic diminishment, wouldn't restore the relationship with my son that had been damaged by assumptions and unspoken resentments. The hidden fortune was just numbers on paper. The real treasure, a family that valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide, remained as elusive as ever. My grandmother's recipe book lay open on the kitchen counter, its pages stained with decades of cooking and love. The handwriting was mine, careful notes about Emma's favorite cookies, modifications for Marcus's food allergies, reminders about Linda's dietary restrictions. Each page represented hours of care, thought, and attention to the needs of people who'd dismissed me as irrelevant. Richard had left an hour ago, but not before extracting promises that I'd consider his offers seriously. The business documents he'd given me sat on my nightstand, a tangible reminder that the world outside this house still valued what I had to contribute. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, his face haggard with the weight of revelation. He'd been trying to apologize for the past 20 minutes, his words tumbling over each other in desperate attempts to explain away 3 years of casual cruelty. Mom, I need you to understand, we never meant to make you feel unwanted. We just thought, after Dad died, you seemed so lost, so fragile. We were trying to give you purpose, structure. I continued kneading the dough for Emma's breakfast muffins, the familiar rhythms soothing in a way that Marcus's explanations weren't. Purpose, I repeated quietly. You thought washing your laundry would give me purpose. That's not what I meant, he said, running his hands through his hair. I meant that being part of our daily routine, helping with Emma, we thought you needed to feel useful. The word useful landed like a slap. After everything we'd learned tonight, he still couldn't understand that I'd never needed to prove my usefulness. Side needed to feel valued, respected, seen as the whole person I'd always been. Linda appeared in the kitchen, her earlier composure replaced by nervous energy. She'd changed clothes twice since Richard left, finally settling on an outfit that struck an awkward balance between casual and respectful, as if the right combination of fabric and accessories could somehow undo 3 years of condescension. Constance, she began, her voice artificially bright. I've been thinking about what Mr. Jung said, and I realized there might have been some misunderstandings between us. Misunderstandings, not deliberate dismissals, not systematic undermining, not 3 years of treating me like hired help. Misunderstandings suggested that the fault was shared, that communication had simply gone awry, rather than acknowledging the intentional nature of my diminishment. I see, I said, measuring flour with practiced precision. The thing is, Linda continued, her words coming faster now, I never realized your background was so impressive. If I'd known you, if you'd mentioned your business experience, things might have been different. I set down the measuring cup and looked at her directly. Different how, Linda? She faltered, realizing the trap in her own logic. Well, we would have, you would have treated me with respect because I had money and professional achievements, I asked, not because I was Marcus's mother, or Emma's grandmother, or a human being deserving of basic dignity. Marcus stepped forward, trying to salvage the conversation. That's not what she means, Mom. We're just saying that if we'd understood your situation better, my situation, I interrupted, was exactly what it appeared to be. I was a recent widow who'd lost her life partner and needed the comfort of family. I was a grandmother who wanted to be involved in her granddaughter's life. I was a woman who'd made significant sacrifices for the people she loved. None of that required a financial portfolio or a business resume to be worthy of respect. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft sounds of my continued baking. These muffins had become a morning tradition, Mun's favorite blueberry recipe that I'd perfected through trial and error. Paying attention to her preferences, caring about her happiness in small but meaningful ways. Mom, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly, how do we fix this? It was the first honest question he'd asked all evening. Not how to explain their behavior, not how to justify their assumptions, but how to repair the damage they'd done to our relationship. I looked at the recipe book, at 3 years' worth of careful attention to their needs, while my own were ignored. I don't know if you can, Marcus. You've taught Emma that it's acceptable to dismiss older people, to treat service as servitude, to measure worth by wealth rather than character. You've shown her that family members can be expendable if they don't meet certain criteria. Emma adores you, Linda protested. She's never treated you badly. No, I agreed, but she's learning from your example every day. She's watching how you speak to me, how you value my contributions, how you include or exclude me from family decisions. Children learn more from what they observe than what they're told. Marcus sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of his failures finally hitting him. What can we do? There has to be something we can do to make this right. I measured the last ingredient and slid the muffin tins into the oven. The timer would ring in 25 minutes, just as it had every morning for 3 years. But this morning felt different, charged with possibility and pain, weighted with truths that couldn't be unspoken. You can start, I said finally, by understanding that respect isn't something you grant based on someone's resume. It's something you offer because you recognize their humanity. You can stop treating me like a problem to be managed and start seeing me as a person with value beyond my utility to your household. Of course, Linda said quickly. Absolutely. We want to do better. But wanting and doing were different things, and I'd learned not to trust promises made in moments of crisis. The recipe book remained open to Emma's favorite cookies, a reminder that love was demonstrated through consistent actions, not dramatic gestures or convenient apologies. The real test wouldn't be tonight's revelations. It would be tomorrow morning, and the day after that, and all the ordinary moments when they'd have to choose between old habits and new understanding. For now, I had muffins to bake and a granddaughter to love, just as I had every morning for 3 years. But everything else, my place in this family, my tolerance for disrespect, my willingness to remain invisible, that was about to change. The legal documents arrived by courier the next morning, delivered in a leather portfolio that spoke of serious business and significant opportunities. Richard had wasted no time translating last night's conversation into concrete proposals, each page representing a pathway back to the world I'd left behind. I spread the papers across my small desk, the same one where I'd helped Emma with homework and managed household schedules. Now it held partnership agreements, project summaries, and financial projections that could reshape the remainder of my life. The centerpiece was a formal offer to rejoin Lim Holdings as senior partner and chief vision officer, with full authority over strategic direction and community development initiatives. The compensation package was generous enough to make Linda's designer handbags look like pocket change. But more importantly, it offered something I'd been missing for 20 years, the chance to build something meaningful again. What's all this? Marcus asked, appearing in my doorway with coffee and what I recognized as an attempt at respectful curiosity rather than his usual casual dismissal. Richard's offer, I said, not looking up from a proposal for affordable housing in Detroit. He wants me to return to active business leadership. Marcus sat down carefully, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Are you considering it? The question was loaded with implications. If I accepted, it would mean leaving this house, leaving Emma's daily care to others, choosing professional fulfillment over family obligation. It would mean admitting that the life I'd built here wasn't enough, that being needed as a grandmother and housekeeper couldn't replace the satisfaction of using my skills to change the world. I'm reviewing the proposals, I said diplomatically, but the truth was more complicated. Each project description awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long: the thrill of solving complex problems, the satisfaction of creating something from nothing, the knowledge that my work could improve thousands of lives. The Detroit Housing Initiative alone would provide homes for 500 families, create jobs for local contractors, and revitalize neighborhoods that had been abandoned by traditional developers. Mom, Marcus said carefully, I know we messed up. I know we treated you badly. But if you leave now, if you take this job, Mom needs you. We all need you. I looked up from the documents, studying my son's face. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain, vulnerable, genuinely afraid of losing me. But his fear wasn't about losing my companionship or wisdom, it was about losing the services I provided, the convenience of having an unpaid nanny and housekeeper. What exactly do you need from me, Marcus? He struggled to articulate something beyond the practical benefits of my presence. You're Emma's grandmother. You're part of our family. We don't want to lose you. You've had me for 3 years, I said quietly. But you treated me like an employee, not family. You valued my labor, not my presence. Now that you know I don't need this arrangement financially, you're suddenly concerned about losing me. Linda appeared behind Marcus, her expression carefully neutral. She'd been walking on eggshells since last night, uncertain how to navigate this new dynamic where the woman she'd dismissed held more power than she'd ever imagined. Constance, she said, her voice artificially warm, surely you can see that this is a difficult transition for all of us. We're trying to adjust, to do better. But these business offers, they seem so sudden, so drastic. I set down the partnership agreement and looked at both of them. What's drastic is discovering that my own family has no idea who I am. What's sudden is realizing that I've been living a lie for 3 years, pretending that being tolerated was the same as being valued. That's not fair, Marcus protested. We love you. We've always loved you. Love isn't just a feeling, Marcus. It's a choice you make every day, through your actions, your words, your treatment of the people who matter to you. Love means seeing someone clearly and honoring who they are, not who you need them to be. The Detroit proposal included photographs of the target neighborhood's abandoned lots that could become community gardens, vacant buildings that could be transformed into affordable housing, empty spaces that could become centers of hope and opportunity. I could see it all so clearly: children playing in safe courtyards, families building equity in homes they could afford, communities healing from decades of neglect. Mrs. Lim, Emma's voice, interrupted my thoughts. She stood in the doorway holding her backpack, ready for school but curious about the adult conversation. Yes, sweetheart. Are you going away? She asked, her dark eyes reflecting a child's intuitive understanding that something important was happening. The question pierced through all the professional opportunities and family complications, cutting straight to the heart of what mattered most. Emma hadn't dismissed me, hadn't treated me as expendable, hadn't made me feel invisible. Her love was pure, uncomplicated by the power dynamics that had poisoned my relationships with her parents. I'm considering some new opportunities, I said, carefully, but whatever I decide, you'll always be my granddaughter, and I'll always love you. But you might not live here anymore. The hope in her voice surprised me, not fear of abandonment, but excitement at the possibility of change. Even at 7 years old, Emma seemed to understand that her grandmother deserved better than the role she'd been assigned in this household. Maybe not, I admitted. Would that make you sad? Emma considered this seriously. A little sad, but also proud. Mommy says you used to build important buildings. I think you should build more. From the mouths of babes, my granddaughter, in her innocent wisdom, had grasped something that her parents still struggled to understand: that love meant wanting the best for someone, even if it meant personal sacrifice. I looked back at the legal documents, at the chance to rebuild not just communities, but my own sense of purpose and identity. The woman who'd once commanded boardrooms was still here, buried beneath years of domestic routine but not destroyed. I need time to think, I said, gathering the papers. These are big decisions with consequences for everyone. But even as I said the words, I felt the familiar excitement building, the same energy that had once driven me to transform empty lots into thriving communities. The business world was calling me back, and for the first time in 20 years, I was ready to answer. Emma's drawing was taped to my bedroom wall, a crayon masterpiece that had been there for 6 months. In it, a figure with black hair and a bright smile stood next to a tall building, with Grandma Constance, the strongest person I know, written in careful 7-year-old handwriting across the bottom. I stared at it now, remembering the afternoon she'd presented it to me with such pride. "I drew you at work," she'd explained. "Before I was born, when you built houses for people." Even then, she'd understood something that her parents had missed. That strength came in many forms, that accomplishment didn't diminish with age, that the woman making her breakfast had once moved mountains. "Grandma." Emma knocked softly on my door, her school clothes neat but her expression troubled. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." She settled on my bed, her small hands folded in her lap with unusual formality. At 7, Emma was already more emotionally intelligent than many adults, able to sense undercurrents and tensions that others missed. "Mommy and Daddy had a big fight last night," she said quietly. "After you went to bed, I heard them talking about you leaving." My heart clenched. I'd hoped to shield Emma from the adult complications, to handle this transition without involving her in conflicts she shouldn't have to navigate. "What did you hear?" I asked gently. "Daddy said you might take a new job far away. Mommy said it would be selfish because families should stay together. Then Daddy said maybe we hadn't been a good family to you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Have we been bad to you, Grandma?" The question broke my heart. How could I explain to a child that her parents had treated me poorly without damaging her relationship with them? How could I be honest about my pain without burdening her with adult guilt and responsibility? "You have never been anything but wonderful to me," I said, pulling her into my arms. "You're the best part of living here, Emma. You make me laugh every day." "But Mommy and Daddy weren't wonderful." I chose my words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups forget to show appreciation for the people they love. Sometimes they take family for granted. It doesn't mean they're bad people, it means they need to do better." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the serious consideration she brought two difficult concepts. "Are you going to take the new job?" "I'm still deciding. It's complicated. Because you don't want to leave me." "Partly. Leaving you would be the hardest part of any decision I make." She brightened suddenly, as if struck by inspiration. "What if I came with you? I could help you build houses. I'm very good at organizing things." I laughed, despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "You are excellent at organizing, but you have school here, and friends, and your parents need you." "Do they need you?" The question was so direct, so cutting in its simplicity, that I struggled to answer. Did Marcus and Linda need me, or just the services I provided? Was my value to them personal or practical? "They say they do," I said finally. Emma frowned, her young mind working through the complexities of adult relationships. "When I need you, it's because I love you and you make me feel safe and happy. When Mommy needs you, it's because she wants you to do things for her." The accuracy of this observation was startling. Emma had distilled 3 years of family dynamics into one clear distinction: the difference between needing someone because you value them and needing someone because you use them. "You're very wise," I said. "I get that from you," she replied matter-of-factly. "Daddy says I'm smart like you were when you were little." We're past tense, as if my intelligence had expired along with my youth. But Emma's perspective was different. She saw continuity where her parents saw decline, strength where they saw obsolescence. "Grandma, can I tell you something important?" "Always. I think you should take the job," she said, her voice serious and determined. "You've been sad here." "Not all the time, but sometimes I see you looking out the window like you want to be somewhere else. And yesterday, when that man came to dinner and talked about your work, you looked happy in a way I've never seen before." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. Emma had noticed things that her parents had missed entirely: my restlessness, my moments of quiet sadness, the way my face had lit up when discussing projects and possibilities. "But what about you?" I asked. "What about our morning muffins and homework help and bedtime stories?" "I'll miss those things," she said honestly. "But Grandma, you taught me that love doesn't disappear when people go away. And you taught me that it's important to follow your dreams, even when it's scary." When had I taught her that? Through stories about my own past, through encouragement for her art projects and ambitious plans, through the example of pursuing goals despite obstacles. I'd been modeling strength and determination without realizing she was learning from every interaction. Besides, Emma continued with 7-year-old pragmatism. If you're happy doing important work, that's better than if you're sad making breakfast. I can learn to make my own muffins. I held her closer, overwhelmed by the wisdom and generosity of this remarkable child. While her parents struggled with guilt and self-interest, Emma had cut straight to the truth that love sometimes meant letting go, that supporting someone's dreams was more important than protecting your own comfort. I love you so much, I whispered. I love you too, and I'm proud of you for being brave enough to build houses and help people, even when it means leaving us. In that moment, I realized that Emma would be fine. More than fine, she would thrive, carrying with her the lessons about strength and independence that I'd tried to model despite my diminished circumstances. She would grow up knowing that women could build empires, that age didn't diminish worth, that respect was earned through character rather than compliance. The drawing on my wall suddenly looked different, not a nostalgic tribute to past accomplishments, but a young girl's recognition of ongoing strengths, a vote of confidence in her grandmother's continued capacity for greatness. If a 7-year-old could see my worth clearly, perhaps it was time I started seeing it clearly too. The golden fountain pen felt familiar in my hand, its weight exactly as I remembered from decades of important signings. I'd used this pen to close my first major deal, to sign partnership agreements that built communities, to put my name on documents that changed lives. Now it would sign papers that would change my own life, once again. The partnership agreement lay before me on the kitchen table, its legal language precise and formal. Richard's offer was generous beyond my expectations, just financially, but in terms of creative control and visionary authority. I would have the power to shape projects from conception to completion, to ensure that every building served communities rather than just investors. Marcus sat across from me, his coffee growing cold as he watched me review the contract. One final time. He'd been hovering for 3 days, alternating between desperate apologies and attempts to negotiate compromises that would keep me nearby, while allowing him to feel less guilty about his treatment of me. Mom, he said quietly, I need you to know that if you take this position, we support you completely. We want you to be happy. The words were right, but his tone carried the hollow ring of someone saying what they thought I wanted to hear rather than expressing genuine feeling. Marcus had always been skilled at managing people's expectations, at finding ways to appear supportive while protecting his own interests. Do you? I asked, not looking up from the contract. Or do you want me to believe you support me so that I'll feel less angry about the way you've treated me? He flinched at the directness of the question. I want both things to be true. I want to support you, and I want you to forgive us. Forgiveness isn't something you can negotiate, Marcus. It's something that happens when people demonstrate real change, not just good intentions. Linda appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. She'd been walking a tightrope since the revelation of my wealth and background, uncertain whether to continue treating me as the household help or suddenly upgrade me to honored family member. The result was an awkward formality that satisfied no one. Constance, she said, her voice artificially bright. I was thinking we should discuss arrangements if you do decide to take this opportunity. We'll need to find reliable childcare for Emma, reorganize the household duties. You'll need to function as an independent family, I interrupted, the way most families do without live-in help. The words carried a sting that Linda couldn't miss. For 3 years, my presence had allowed them to avoid the normal challenges of dual career parenting. They'd never had to arrange after-school care, coordinate schedules around sick days, or manage household responsibilities without an extra pair of hands. Of course, Linda said quickly, we're perfectly capable of managing on our own. We just want to make the transition as smooth as possible for everyone, especially for themselves. But I was done protecting them from the consequences of their choices. Done making their lives easier at the expense of my own dignity and fulfillment. Emma bounded into the kitchen, her backpack trailing behind her as she prepared for school. She took one look at the papers spread across the table and grinned. Are you signing the job papers, Grandma? I'm considering it, I said, smiling at her enthusiasm. You should definitely sign them. I looked up your company on Mommy's computer. You built really cool buildings, and the website says you help families have nice homes. That's important work. Her parents exchanged glances, probably wondering when their 7-year-old had become more supportive of my career aspirations than they were. But Emma understood something. They'd forgotten that meaningful work was a privilege, not a burden, and that contributing to something larger than yourself was worth celebrating. Emma's right, I said, picking up the golden pen. This is important. Work that matters. The pen moved smoothly across the signature line, my name flowing in the same confident script I'd used 30 years ago. With each letter, I felt pieces of myself clicking back into place: the strategist, the visionary, the woman who saw potential where others saw only problems. There, I said, setting down the pen. It's done. Marcus looked stricken, as if the signed contract made my departure suddenly real. When do you start? Next month. I'll need time to find an apartment in the city, to prepare for the transition. I looked around the kitchen where I'd spent countless hours preparing meals, helping with homework, providing unpaid domestic labor while my own dreams gathered dust. And I'll need time to establish new boundaries with this family. Boundaries? Linda asked, her voice carefully controlled. Yes, I'm no longer available as free childcare, household management, or emotional labor. I'm Emma's grandmother, and Marcus's mother, but I'm not your employee. If you want my time and attention, you'll need to ask respectfully and accept that I might say no. The words felt powerful, liberating in a way I hadn't experienced in years. For too long, I'd been available for their every need while my own needs went unrecognized. That dynamic was ending today. Of course, Marcus said quickly. We understand completely. We want you to prioritize your career, your happiness. Good, I said, gathering the signed documents. Then you'll understand when I tell you that I expect genuine respect, not just polite tolerance. I expect acknowledgement of my value beyond my utility, and I expect Emma to see her grandmother treated with the dignity that every person deserves. Emma clapped her hands together, clearly delighted by this turn of events. Does this mean you'll wear fancy business clothes again, like in the old pictures? It means I'll be myself again, I said, hugging her close. The version of myself that I was before I forgot who I was. The golden pen caught the morning light, its surface reflecting decades of important decisions and new beginnings. Some signatures marked endings, others marked transformations. This one marked both the end of diminished expectations and the beginning of reclaimed power. As I prepared to step back into the world that had once been mine, I felt the familiar electricity of possibility coursing through me. The woman who'd built an empire was returning, and this time, she wouldn't allow anyone to make her invisible. The power suit hung in my closet like armor waiting for battle. Navy blue with subtle pinstripes, it had been tailored specifically for my body 22 years ago, a celebration purchase after closing the largest deal of my career. I'd kept it through moves and lifestyle changes, unable to part with something that represented so much of who I'd once been. Now, as I slipped it on for my first day back at Lim Holdings, I felt the transformation begin. The fabric fell perfectly across my shoulders, the cut emphasizing strength rather than diminishing it. In the mirror, I saw not the diminished grandmother who'd been washing dishes and folding laundry, but the executive who'd once commanded boardrooms filled with skeptical men twice her size. Wow, Emma breathed from my doorway. You look like a superhero. I feel like one, I admitted, adjusting the jacket's lapels. Sometimes, the right clothes help you remember who you really are. Marcus appeared behind Emma, his expression complicated, as he took in my transformation. For 3 years, he'd seen me in comfortable cardigans and practical shoes, the uniform of domestic invisibility. This version of his mother probably looked like a stranger. You look, he started, then stopped, searching for words. You look like you used to in the old photos. Powerful, confident. I am powerful and confident, I said, meeting his gaze in the mirror. I never stopped being those things. I just forgot them for a while. The morning routine was different now. Instead of preparing breakfast for the family, I made coffee for myself and reviewed project files over toast. Instead of managing their schedules, I focused on my own agenda: meetings with city planners, site visits to potential development areas, strategy sessions with the team I'd be leading. Linda emerged from the master bedroom as I was gathering my briefcase and laptop, her expression carefully neutral as she processed this new dynamic. For 3 years, she'd relied on my presence to manage the 1,000 small details that kept their household functioning smoothly. Now she was facing the reality of coordinating her own family's needs while maintaining her career. I made a list of emergency contacts for Emma's school, I said, handing her a sheet of paper. The pediatrician's number, the after-school program, information, and contact details for the backup babysitters I've been using. Thank you, Linda said, accepting the list with what might have been genuine gratitude. I appreciate you helping with the transition. I'm helping because I love Emma, I clarified, not because I owe you anything. There's a difference. The distinction was important. For too long, my assistance had been taken for granted, expected rather than appreciated. Now any help I provided would be a gift freely given, not an obligation automatically assumed. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard, car, waiting outside, ready to change the world again. I smiled, feeling a surge of excitement that had been missing from my life for years. The business world had continued evolving during my absence, but the fundamental challenges remained the same. How to create housing that communities could afford, how to develop sustainably, how to build spaces that enhanced rather than diminished the lives of the people who used them. I have to go, I said, slinging my laptop bag over my shoulder. The weight felt good, purposeful, and professional. Emma hugged me fiercely. Have a good day, building important things, Grandma. I will, sweetheart. Have a good day learning important things. Marcus walked me to the door, his demeanor respectful in a way it hadn't been for years. Mom, I know this is a big day for you. I want you to know that we're proud of you. Are you? I asked, pausing with my hand on the doorknob. Or, are you trying to feel better about the way you've treated me? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question with unusual seriousness. Both, probably, but mostly. I'm realizing that I never really knew you. The woman walking out this door, this is who you've always been, isn't it? I just couldn't see it. You couldn't see it because you weren't looking, I said gently. You saw the role I was playing, not the person playing it. There's a difference. The black sedan waiting outside represented more than just transportation. It represented re-entry into a world where my opinions mattered, where my experience was valued, where my presence commanded respect rather than tolerance. As we drove through the city, I watched the skyline with new eyes. Several of the buildings bore the subtle signature of Lim Holdings' design philosophy: clean lines, integrated green spaces, affordable units mixed seamlessly with market-rate housing. The work had continued without me, but my influence was still visible in every thoughtful detail. Mrs. Lim, the driver said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. Mr. Zhang wanted me to tell you that the entire team is excited about your return. Some of the younger architects have been studying your old projects as examples of best practices. My old projects were now considered classic examples of sustainable development. Work I'd completed decades ago was still being studied, still influencing new generations of builders and planners. While I'd been questioning my relevance, the industry had been honoring my legacy. The office building was new, 30 floors of glass and steel that hadn't existed when I'd stepped away from active leadership, but the lobby displayed a familiar element, a bronze plaque commemorating the founding principles of Lim Holdings, including a quote from the company's original mission statement that I'd written in my tiny Flushing office 3 decades ago. Building communities, not just structures. Creating homes, not just housing. Developing sustainably for generations yet to come. Those words had guided every major decision I'd made as a developer. Now they would guide my return to the industry that had shaped so much of who I was. As the elevator carried me toward my new office, I caught my reflection in the polished doors. The woman looking back at me wore confidence like armor and purpose, like jewelry. She was ready to build again, to lead again, to matter again. The suit fit perfectly, but more importantly, it fit the woman I'd never stopped being underneath all those years of diminished expectations. Today marked not just a career restart, but a reclamation of identity that had been buried but never destroyed. The doors opened, and I stepped into my future. The family portrait was taken at the Urban Development Awards ceremony, where I'd been honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award for my contributions to sustainable housing. In the photograph, I stood center stage in my navy suit, flanked by Richard and James, with Marcus, Linda, and Emma arranged beside us like a proper family unit. But the real story was in the details. Linda's forced smile as she realized that every important person in the room knew my name and accomplishments. Marcus's mixture of pride and shame as colleagues congratulated him on having such a remarkable mother. Emma's genuine delight at seeing her grandmother recognized for the greatness she'd always suspected. The evening had been a reckoning years in the making. It started during the cocktail hour, when Linda found herself in conversations where my name carried more weight than her husband's job title. or her own carefully cultivated social connections. City council members approached her with genuine warmth, asking how the legendary Constance Lim was adjusting to her return to active leadership. I had no idea she was so well respected. I overheard Linda telling another guest, her voice carrying the slightly desperate tone of someone trying to rewrite history in real time. "We've always been so proud of her accomplishments." The woman I recognized as the current housing commissioner looked puzzled. "Really? Because when we tried to invite her to policy roundtables over the past few years, we were told she wasn't available for professional commitments. We assumed she'd fully retired from public life." Linda's face went through several expressions as she processed this information. The woman who'd spent 3 years treating me as a relevant household help was learning that my professional absence had been noticed and mourned by the very people she most wanted to impress. Marcus was having his own revelations across the room, where his colleagues from the consulting firm were peppering him with questions about growing up with such an influential mother. "She must have been an incredible role model," one of them said. "Having a mother who broke so many barriers in construction and development, that must have shaped your perspective on women in leadership." I watched Marcus struggle to respond, unable to admit that he'd spent the past 3 years treating that barrier-breaking mother as an inconvenient dependent. His discomfort was visible to anyone paying attention, which unfortunately for him included several people whose opinions mattered to his career. The award presentation itself was emotional, in ways I hadn't expected. As Richard introduced me to the audience, he spoke not just about my professional accomplishments, but about the personal sacrifices I'd made to support my family, the integrity I'd brought to an industry often lacking in ethical leadership, the way I'd mentored younger developers and advocated for communities whose voices were rarely heard. "Constance Lim didn't just build buildings," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the banquet hall. "She built a legacy of responsible development that continues to influence every project we undertake. She proved that profitability and social responsibility aren't mutually exclusive, they're mutually essential." The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. As I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces reflecting genuine respect and admiration, I felt the final pieces of my confidence clicking back into place. These people, mayors, developers, architects, community leaders, had never forgotten my worth. Only my own family had needed reminding. My acceptance speech was brief but pointed. I spoke about the responsibility that comes with the power to shape communities, about the importance of listening to the people who would actually live in the housing we created, about the need for developers to think beyond profit margins to consider their impact on future generations. 20 years ago, I concluded, I stepped back from this industry to focus on family. It was the right choice then, and returning now is the right choice today. But I want to be clear, my value as a developer was never diminished by my years as a mother and grandmother. If anything, those experiences deepened my understanding of what communities really need. We build not just for today's residents, but for the children who will inherit what we create. The applause was thunderous, but I was looking at my family. Emma was clapping enthusiastically, her face shining with pride. Marcus looked stunned, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Linda's expression was harder to read, a mixture of embarrassment, calculation, and what might have been genuine remorse. During the reception that followed, I was surrounded by old colleagues and new admirers, people wanting to discuss projects, share ideas, and simply reconnect with someone they'd missed in the industry. Marcus and Linda hovered at the edges of these conversations, probably realizing that the woman they'd relegated to kitchen duty was more professionally connected than they'd ever been. Mrs. Lim, the mayor herself, approached our group, her smile warm and genuine. "I can't tell you how delighted we are to have you back in active development. The affordable housing crisis needs exactly the kind of innovative thinking you've always brought to these challenges. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm excited to contribute to solutions. I hope you'll consider joining our Housing Advisory Committee. We meet monthly to discuss policy and funding priorities. Your perspective would be invaluable." I accepted graciously, aware that Linda was absorbing every word of this conversation. The mayor wasn't making small talk or being politely social. She was actively recruiting my expertise for city governance. As the evening wound down, we gathered for the family photograph that would capture this moment of transformation. But the real photograph, the one that would matter long after the formal portraits were forgotten, was the image of my family finally understanding who I'd always been. In the car ride home, Emma chattered excitedly about the ceremony, the important people she'd met, the pride she felt in her grandmother's recognition. Marcus and Linda were unusually quiet, perhaps processing the gap between how they'd treated me and how the rest of the world saw my value. "Mom," Marcus said finally, "I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than anything I've said before. Tonight I realized that we didn't just treat you badly, we failed to see you at all." It was the first apology that felt genuine, that acknowledged the full scope of their blindness rather than trying to minimize it or explain it away. "The question now," I said quietly, "is whether you can learn to see me going forward, not just because other people recognize my worth, but because I'm your mother and I've always deserved your respect." The reckoning was complete. But the real work, rebuilding relationships based on mutual respect rather than convenient assumptions, was just beginning. The antique Chinese tea set had been my mother's wedding gift to me, each piece hand-painted, with delicate peonies that symbolized honor and prosperity. For 30 years, it had graced special occasions and important conversations, its presence lending gravity and tradition to moments that mattered. Today, as I arranged the cups on my new apartment's dining table, it would serve perhaps its most important purpose, facilitating the difficult conversation that would determine whether my family relationships could be rebuilt or simply maintained. Marcus and Linda sat across from me, their posture formal and uncertain. This was their first visit to my downtown apartment. A spacious two-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The space reflected my reclaimed identity, professional but warm, sophisticated but comfortable, clearly the home of someone who valued both success and serenity. Emma was at the coffee table in the living room, working on homework while stealing glances at the adults. She'd adapted to our new arrangement with the resilience of childhood, spending weekends with me and maintaining our close relationship despite the physical distance. If anything, our time together had become more precious, because it was no longer taken for granted. "Thank you for agreeing to this," Marcus said as I poured the tea with ceremonial precision. "I know we don't deserve your time or patience, but I needed to have this conversation properly." The tea ceremony itself was a form of respect, an acknowledgement that some discussions required ritual and reverence. My mother had taught me that important words should be spoken with intention, surrounded by beauty and tradition that reminded participants of what truly mattered. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Linda said, accepting her cup with both hands as I'd taught her years ago. "Not just the dinner with Mr. Zhang, but everything that led up to it. The way we treated you, the assumptions we made, the disrespect we showed." Her voice carried a weight I'd never heard before, not the artificial contrition of someone trying to manage a crisis, but the genuine remorse of someone who'd finally understood the magnitude of their mistakes. "I grew up believing that success was measured by what you accumulated: money, possessions, status symbols," she continued. "When you came to live with us, I saw someone who didn't have those things anymore, and I made the terrible mistake of thinking that meant you didn't matter anymore." Marcus nodded, his own tea cooling as he struggled to find adequate words. "I think I was afraid," he admitted. "After Dad died, I felt this pressure to be the head of the family, to take care of everyone, but I didn't know how to take care of you without diminishing you. So I let Linda manage the household dynamics, and I pretended not to see how those dynamics were hurting you." "You weren't pretending," I said gently. "You genuinely didn't see. There's a difference, and it's important that you understand it." "What do you mean?" I sipped my tea, choosing my words carefully. "Pretending implies deliberate choice. You weren't choosing to ignore my pain, you were genuinely unable to see it, because you'd convinced yourself that I was content with my diminished role. You needed to believe I was happy being useful rather than valued, because acknowledging my unhappiness would have required you to examine your own behavior. The distinction was crucial for forgiveness. I could forgive blindness more easily than deliberate cruelty, confusion more readily than calculated dismissal." "I robbed Emma of seeing her grandmother treated with proper respect," Linda said, tears gathering in her eyes. "I taught her, through my example, that older people become less important, that women's worth diminishes with age, that family members can be taken for granted if they don't fight back." This acknowledgement moved me more than any apology for my own treatment. Linda had finally understood that the damage extended beyond our relationship to encompass the values being modeled for the next generation. But Emma also saw me reclaim my dignity. I pointed out, she saw that it's never too late to demand respect, that women can be powerful at any age, that true family supports each other's dreams rather than limiting them. She talks about you constantly, Marcus said, managing a small smile. About your work, your projects, the important meetings you attend. She's proud of you in a way that makes me realize how much pride I missed out on feeling during those 3 years. The afternoon light streamed through my windows, illuminating the tea set's delicate patterns and casting gentle shadows across our faces. This apartment represented freedom, the ability to live according to my own standards, to surround myself with beauty and purpose, to invite people in rather than being granted permission to exist in their space. I need you both to understand something, I said, setting down my cup with deliberate care. I can forgive the past, but I won't tolerate any return to those patterns. My relationship with this family going forward will be based on mutual respect, not convenience or obligation. What does that look like practically? Linda asked. It means that when I visit Emma, I'm her grandmother, not your babysitter. It means that when I help with family situations, it's because I choose to, not because it's expected. It means that my professional commitments take priority over your domestic needs, just as yours do. Marcus nodded seriously. We understand, and we want you to know that we're trying to do better with Emma too. We've hired proper after-school care. We're splitting household responsibilities more fairly, and we're teaching her that independence and capability are more valuable than comfort and convenience. Good, I said, because the woman I'm becoming, again the woman I've always been underneath everything, she doesn't have time for relationship dynamics that diminish rather than elevate the people involved. Emma looked up from her homework, apparently having overheard more of our conversation than we'd realized. Grandma, are you going to forgive Mommy and Daddy? The question hung in the air with the weight of childhood hope and adult complexity. Forgiveness wasn't a simple yes or no, it was a process, a choice made repeatedly over time, a decision to release resentment while maintaining boundaries. I'm going to try, sweetheart, I said honestly. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It means choosing to build something better going forward, like building a new house instead of trying to fix a broken one. Her architectural metaphor made me smile. Exactly like that. Sometimes the foundation is strong enough to rebuild on, and sometimes you need to start fresh. We're going to rebuild, but with better materials this time. The tea ceremony concluded with the cleaning of cups and the careful storage of precious things, not unlike the process of rebuilding family relationships. Some elements would be preserved and honored, others would be discarded or transformed, and the result would be something both familiar and entirely new. As Marcus and Linda prepared to leave, there was a lightness in the air that hadn't existed for years, not the false cheerfulness of conflict avoidance, but the genuine relief of truth acknowledged and responsibility accepted. Forgiveness, I was learning, was less about absolving the past and more about choosing the future. And for the first time in years, the future looked bright enough to choose. The elegant business card holder on my desk contained 2 distinct sets of cards, the crisp new ones bearing my current title as senior partner at Lim Holdings, and the vintage ones from my original company, carefully preserved as reminders of the journey that had brought me full circle. Together, they represented the bridge between past and present, the continuity of purpose that had survived 20 years of dormancy. 6 months into my return to active leadership, the new dynamic with my family had settled into something approaching normalcy, though it was a normalcy built on respect rather than assumption, choice rather than obligation, mutual appreciation rather than one-sided service. The change was most evident during Emma's weekend visits to my apartment. Instead of the caretaking relationship that had defined our interactions in Marcus and Linda's house, we now functioned as 2 individuals who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. She helped me review kid-friendly designs for the new community center project. I helped her with increasingly sophisticated math homework, and we both benefited from conversations that treated her insights seriously rather than dismissively. Grandma, why do some buildings have playgrounds and some don't? She asked one Saturday morning as we reviewed architectural plans over breakfast. That's an excellent question, I said, spreading the blueprints across my dining table. What do you think the answer might be? Maybe the people who built them didn't think about kids. Or maybe they thought kids weren't important. Her intuitive understanding of urban planning priorities never ceased to amaze me. You're absolutely right. Many developers focus only on adult needs because they don't take time to understand how families actually live. But you're different, she observed, studying the playground equipment specifications with serious attention. You put the playground right in the middle where everyone can see it, because children's safety and happiness should be central to community design, not an afterthought. These conversations represented more than just quality time with my granddaughter. They reflected the fundamental shift in how our family operated. Emma was learning to see her grandmother as a person with valuable ideas and important work, not just someone who existed to meet her needs. Marcus had made perhaps the most dramatic adjustment, transforming from the son who'd taken my presence for granted to someone who actively sought my counsel on professional and personal matters. His consulting firm had begun specializing in sustainable development projects, partly inspired by his belated recognition of his mother's expertise in the field. "I have a client meeting next week about a housing project in Queens," he'd told me during a recent phone call. "Would you be willing to review the preliminary plans? I value your perspective." The request was professional rather than personal, respectful rather than presumptuous. He wasn't asking me to solve his problems or provide free labor. He was acknowledging my expertise and requesting consultation, which I could accept or decline based on my own schedule and inclinations. Linda's evolution had been more gradual but equally significant. The woman who'd once lectured me about buying the wrong brand of pasta now sought my advice on everything from career decisions to Emma's educational choices. More importantly, she'd begun demonstrating respect through actions rather than just words. "Constance, I know you're incredibly busy with the Detroit project," she'd said when calling to arrange Emma's latest visit, "but if you have time and energy, we'd love to have you join us for Emma's school presentation about careers in architecture." She specifically requested that you be there. The invitation was genuine, the request was optional, and the recognition of my expertise was explicit. This was how functional families operated, with consideration for each other's time, respect for each other's priorities, and appreciation for each other's contributions. The business card holder caught the afternoon light, its polished surface reflecting the success of this careful reconstruction. The vintage cards reminded me of dreams deferred but not destroyed, while the new ones represented possibilities reclaimed and purposes renewed. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "City Council approved the Affordable Housing Initiative. Your sustainable design protocols are now municipal policy. Celebration dinner tonight." I smiled, remembering similar moments of triumph from my earlier career. But this success felt different, richer, more meaningful, because it came after a period of doubt and diminishment. I'd proven to myself that worth doesn't diminish with age, that expertise doesn't expire with career breaks, that women can rebuild their professional lives regardless of the detours they've taken for family. Another text arrived, this one from Emma. "Can't wait to see you this weekend. I have new ideas for the playground design, and I want to show you my social studies project about urban development." The projects and meetings that filled my days were important, but they were no longer the only sources of meaning in my life. The balance I'd struggled to achieve 20 years ago between professional fulfillment and family connection had finally emerged naturally from relationships built on mutual respect rather than unequal sacrifice. The business card holder represented more than just professional networking tools. It symbolized the integration of all aspects of my identity: the successful developer, the devoted grandmother, the woman who'd learned that she didn't have to choose between achievement and love if the people around her were willing to support both. As I prepared for the celebration dinner with Richard and the team, I reflected on how much had changed since that shocking evening when he'd recognized me in Marcus and Linda's kitchen. The woman who'd been serving appetizers was now setting municipal policy. The grandmother who'd been dismissed as irrelevant was now shaping the communities where thousands of families would build their futures. The new dynamic wasn't just about how my family treated me. It was about how I'd learned to value myself. The business cards were merely symbols of a deeper transformation. The reclamation of a woman who'd temporarily forgotten her own worth but had never actually lost it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to build something meaningful. But tonight, I would celebrate not just professional success, but the personal revolution that had made that success possible again. The will and testament lay open on my desk, its pages reflecting 2 years of careful consideration about legacy, values, and the true meaning of inheritance. Unlike the documents I'd signed decades ago, in moments of crisis or transition, this one had been crafted with the wisdom that comes from understanding both success and failure. both independence and interdependence, both the cost of sacrifice and the price of respect. Emma sat across from me, now 9 years old and possessed of the kind of serious intelligence that made our conversations feel like consultations with a particularly insightful colleague. She was studying the architectural drawings for our latest project at Community Center that would serve 3 neighborhoods and provide after-school programs, senior services, and small business incubation space. "Grandma, why did you put the library right next to the childcare center?" she asked, her finger tracing the floor plan with the same careful attention I'd once given to blueprints that would reshape skylines. "What do you think the reason might be?" I countered, having learned that Emma's insights were often more valuable than adult assumptions. "So parents can read while their kids play, and so kids can see that reading is important because adults do it too." "Exactly. Architecture should facilitate connection, not create barriers." This conversation, like so many others over the past 2 years, represented the real legacy I was building, not just buildings that would outlast me, but values and perspectives that would shape the next generation's approach to problems, community building, and human dignity. The will itself reflected these priorities. Yes, there were financial provisions that would ensure Emma's education and provide security for Marcus and Linda. But the document's true focus was on the continuation of work that mattered. The Lim Foundation would receive the majority of my estate, with specific provisions for scholarships targeting women in construction, immigrant entrepreneurs, and community development projects that prioritized sustainability and affordability. But perhaps most importantly, the will established a trust fund specifically for Emma's future, not just for her education or financial security, but for her own potential contributions to community development. Whether she chose architecture, urban planning, social work, or any other field that served the public good, she would have the resources to pursue her dreams without compromise. "Emma," I said, setting aside the architectural drawings, "I want to talk to you about something important." She looked up with the kind of focused attention that reminded me of myself, at her age, curious, serious, ready to engage with ideas that adults often consider too complex for children. "You know that I've been working on projects that help families have better homes and communities, right?" "Yes, like the houses that don't cost too much money, and the playgrounds that are safe for all kids, and the buildings that don't hurt the environment." "That's right, but someday, I won't be able to do this work anymore. And I want to make sure that the values behind the work, caring about people, solving problems, building things that make the world better, those values continue." "Are you going to die soon?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. "Not if I can help it," I said, smiling. "But everyone gets older, and it's important to plan for the future. I'm working on documents that will make sure the foundation can keep helping people even after I'm gone, like a blueprint for helping people, exactly like that. A blueprint for continuing work that matters." Marcus appeared in the doorway of my home office, his expression reflecting the mixture of pride and regret that had characterized our relationship since that transformative dinner 2 years ago. He'd grown into his role as someone whose mother was genuinely important in the world, learning to balance filial affection with professional respect. "Mom, sorry to interrupt, but Linda and I wanted to discuss the Family Foundation board structure with you, if you have time." The request was appropriately deferential, acknowledging both my expertise and my autonomy. This was how our interactions worked now, with recognition that my time was valuable. My decisions were final, and my vision for the Foundation's future took precedence over their preferences. "Of course. Emma, would you like to hear about how foundations work, or would you prefer to continue with the architectural drawings?" "Can I hear about both? I think they might be connected." Her intuition was correct, as usual. The Foundation's work and my architectural projects were deeply interconnected, representing different approaches to the same fundamental goal: creating environments where people could thrive regardless of their economic circumstances or social status. Linda joined us, her transformation over the past 2 years perhaps the most dramatic of anyone's. The woman who'd once dismissed me as irrelevant household help now served as a volunteer coordinator for the Foundation's scholarship program, using her organizational skills and social connections to support the next generation of women in construction and development. "Constance, we've been discussing the board composition," she said, settling into one of the chairs around my conference table. "We think the Foundation would benefit from having Emma involved from an early age, maybe starting with a youth advisory position that would grow into full board membership as she gets older." The suggestion reflected their understanding that Emma's perspective was valuable, not because she was my granddaughter, but because her insights into community needs were often more accurate than those of adults who'd lost touch with how families actually lived. That's an excellent idea, I said. Emma, what do you think about helping decide how to give money to people who want to build good things? I think kids should definitely have a say in how buildings get built, she replied seriously. Adults forget things that are important to kids, like having places to ride bikes safely and having bathrooms that aren't scary. Marcus laughed, but not dismissively. She's right. Most urban planning completely ignores children's perspectives, which is why having her involved from the beginning makes sense, Linda added. She sees things we miss. The will and testament suddenly seemed less like a morbid legal necessity and more like a strategic plan for ensuring that the values driving my work would outlive my ability to implement them personally. Emma would grow up understanding that wealth was a tool for creating change, that success was measured by impact rather than accumulation, that the most important legacy was the difference you made in other people's lives. There's something else I want you all to understand, I said, looking around the table at my family 3 generations, connected by blood but bound together by something deeper, shared commitment to work that mattered. The foundation isn't just about continuing my projects, it's about adapting my values to address whatever challenges arise in the future. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I mean that the problems communities face will change over time. Climate change, technological disruption, demographic shifts, all of these will require new solutions, but the underlying principles, treating people with dignity, solving problems collaboratively, building sustainably for future generations, principles should guide whatever specific work the foundation does. Emma nodded seriously. So, it's like having rules that help you make good decisions even when the situation is new. Exactly. Values are like architectural principles. They provide structure that can support many different designs. As the afternoon progressed and we discussed the foundation's future, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with professional recognition or financial success. This was the legacy I'd really been building all along, a family that understood the difference between wealth and worth, that valued contribution over consumption, that saw privilege as responsibility rather than entitlement. The will and testament would ensure the foundation's financial stability, but this conversation was ensuring something more important: the transmission of values across generations, the continuation of work that would outlive any individual contribution. Outside my office windows, the city skyline included several buildings that bore the subtle signature of my design philosophy: affordable, community-focused development that proved profitability and social responsibility weren't mutually exclusive. But the real architecture I'd been constructing all along was this: a framework for living that honored both individual achievement and collective responsibility, both personal fulfillment and service to others. Emma returned to her drawings, Marcus and Linda discussed volunteer coordination, and I reviewed the legal documents that would formalize our shared commitment to building a better world. The legacy wasn't just about what I'd accomplished in my lifetime, it was about what would continue long after my time was over. And in that continuation, in the promise that the work would evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential character, I found the deepest satisfaction of my professional and personal life. Some buildings last for decades, others for centuries, but values, when properly constructed and carefully maintained, can last forever.